Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope that you have a good lunchtime. Have a beautiful day here in Chicago today, so thank you for sticking with us indoors. Likely we have this amazing view here at 1871 to enjoy a little bit of the sunlight. So a couple of announcements and preparations moving on. So next we're going to be hosting our afternoon session for today. This is a session about capturing ridership data. We're going to have a session with 3 panelists and 1 moderator, and we're going to be taking questions and opening for Q&A at the end. And I want to just go ahead and give you a sense of what to expect after that. So for those of you who are MIC grantee meetings, as you know, we're going to be hosting our monthly group meetings in a hybrid fashion. So for those of you who are here virtually, in person, we're going to be breaking out into different breakout rooms. So please make sure that you identify your SUMC team lead for your group. So MOD is going to be with Nate. I'm going to be leading autonomous vehicles. Colin is going to be taking novel data and payment integrations. And Rudy, as usual, multimodal data integration. So please make sure that you identify your lead, and we can walk together to the breakout rooms here within 1871. And then we're going to be joined by our fellow MIC grantees via Zoom as well, as usual. So that's going to happen immediately after the session ends. So about 3:30, we're going to be starting those virtual meetings. And for those of you who are not MIC grantees, we invite you to stay around here. We're going to be serving some drinks, and there's going to be some SUMC staff who's going to be around telling more about our work. We're going to be shooting a couple of interviews with innovators who want to tell us more about what you are working on your ideas about innovation, in addition to responding to the survey that we presented this morning. And after that, you're going to be free to go. As you know, there's for those of you attending the summit, there's a couple of plans happy hour around the Cubs game in Northside. So you're more than welcome to join that event or stay around, and we can continue our conversations and then work through a happy hour around the corner. So that is in terms of what you expect for the rest of the afternoon. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Colin Murphy from SUMC, Bibiana McHugh from TriMet, Omer Verbas from Argonne National Laboratory, and Carlos Cruz-Casas from Miami-Dade.
We're going to sit for this one. We're going to mix it all up. So thanks for coming back from lunch, everybody. Welcome to the second session of the MIC workshop. The title is Capturing Ridership Data, although as we established in the last session, I think it should be NTD is not enough. So we're talking about efforts to go beyond kind of the basic required understanding and reporting around transit ridership, going beyond just how many people are getting on at which bus stop, but trying to understand how public agencies and others are working to understand not only how many people are getting on the bus and trains, but who they are, where they're coming from, where they need to go, whether the public transit or other modes even get them there, and how everything connects with the greater ecosystem of modes that are out there. So I am Colin Murphy. I'm the Director of Research and Consulting, and I actually needed to look at my notes for that. I'm Director of Research and Consulting at the Shared Use Mobility Center. This is my first time back with people. So can I have see hands of how many people this is your first time back around? Okay. Yeah, so like a third. And the rest of you, congratulations on getting out there. And so I'm the Director of Research and Consulting at SUMC. I lead with our federal work. I lead the novel data group of grantees in AIM and IMI, and work on consulting with other agencies and cities around the country. And with me today are Bibiana McHugh, who is the manager of mobility and location-based services at TriMet in Portland. And everybody can do a longer introduction of themselves and their work when I'm done. But, and then immediately to my right is Omer Verbas. He's a technical lead for network modeling and simulation at Argonne National Laboratories out to the west of Chicago. And Carlos Cruz-Casas, Chief Innovation Officer at the Miami-Dade Department of Transportation and Public Works. And I will let them all tell you a little bit more about themselves once they get into their presentations. But the format here is going to be, each of them is going to talk for a few minutes, and everybody has some slides. And then we will have some questions sort of among us, and then we'll open it up for the audience. So be thinking of questions as they come up. And we will start off with Bibiana. And I just want to say, as Alvaro mentioned, we do have these MIC group meetings that take place after this, and those have people who are calling in on Zoom. And so we're going to try to have a kind of soft landing of this session. But if we cut things off in a hurry when we get towards the end, please forgive us. And with that, I'll hand it to Bibiana.
There we go. Boy. I'm Bibiana McHugh from TriMet, and I'm the manager of mobility. I have worked at TriMet for almost 25 years. It's crazy to think about that. But yeah, I've had really great opportunities working with public-private partners, working with Google on Google Transit, GTFS, working with a wide range of developers across the U.S. to develop Open Trip Planner. And my motto is, what's more important than location, location, location? It's developer, developer, developer. And now it's data scientist, data scientist, data scientist. I think we're, evolving into this realm of how important, data is beyond policy. So I also have to share with you, this is absolutely my favorite conference. And I haven't been here since before COVID, and it's really great to see. I hope to spend some time with all of you. There's nothing like connecting in person. That's when you find out all the scoop after in the evening. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to talk about the ridership analysis that we're doing at TriMet. So again, as most of you know, transit agencies are evolving from just managing transit into managing a whole comprehensive system across the region. And there's a lot to that, but one of the things that we realized was you needed data to really understand the performance and create metrics beyond just transit data, just beyond passenger counts. So recently we received an IMI grant. Previously, I managed the Mod Sandbox grant. We're very fortunate to work with the FTA. I don't think anyone would be able to do innovations in technology without the support of the FTA and organizations like SUMC. So there's 3 areas of focus for the IMI grant. And the third area of focus is what I'm going to be discussing right now. But again, it's bringing mobility data together to really assess it. So go ahead. I just want to make note of all of our partners. Our partners, oh my God, combined, we have more than, like a 35% share in-kind contributions. So I think this really demonstrates how everybody understands the importance of this, especially the private partners. So again, assembling the mobility team, we pulled together Fair and Peers, and IBI is also managing, overseeing, the entire project. And And with Fair and Peers, we did a lot of metrics, user studies initially when we first started the project. And I wish we would have waited, because about a year into it, we hired Urban Logic, our smart mobility platform. And now, once we have the data in the hands of the planners, they're like, well, actually, that's not important. We want this, we want this. We want to view it this way, not that way. So I wish we would have just went straight into the data. But yeah, go ahead. So some of the primary metrics that we're looking at is time, journey time, customer satisfaction, and accessibility. And really focusing on these areas. And I'd like to introduce the Smart Mobility Platform. I didn't know what to call it, so it's smart, it's a platform, it has to do with mobility. Data's missing from there, but basically it's a web-based tool, but it's cloud-based, and the most important thing about it is it's not just transit data. We have feeds from our transit agency into this platform. We also have software routing, such as the Open Trip Planner, and we're also pulling data in from everywhere. OpenStreetMap is our underlying routing network, TSPs, Transit Signal Priorities, all the APIs, everything we can get our hands on. We even have, make sure everybody's sitting down, but we even partnered with Uber, and we have Uber data, yeah, and Lime, a bike town. So it's really interesting to pull all this information together and actually begin to see what the potential is. And this is a diagram I like to use. If you can think of it, the Smart Mobility Platform supports really all mobility initiatives and also tools on top of that. Our trip planner, our web trip planner, our mobility as a service, a lot of people think, well, that's the core of mobility. It's not. It is one byproduct of your mobility platform. There's also a lot of other applications, service planning apps, analytics, KPIs, modeling tools, analytics and connectivity. And this slide is extremely important, I think, because our mobility platform, from the very beginning, there were three number one requirements. It had to be open architecture, it has to be using open data and open standards. Open architecture, I wish I could get up and talk. But open architecture, it's because, like, for instance, service planning applications, they are coming out faster than we can keep track of them. And we don't want to be tied to just one. We want to be able to plug and play. We don't want to be tied to any one vendor. So, go ahead.
If you want to stand up and walk around while you talk, feel free.
Yeah, I need to. So I talked about this, if you want to go on. Here's a dashboard from the Urban Logic platform. Go ahead and I'll show you some other visuals, charts, go ahead, graphs, pulling in the map, the spatial and the temporal information. Yeah, go ahead. And then for the first time, looking at multimodal trip planning analysis and being able to look at and visualize how many people are taking modes, what are the transfers, being able to study incentives for doing that. Go ahead. And then the benefits of multimodal trip planner, I always have to include this slide, but it's a solution to the last mile problem. All the other trip planners out there, they'll plan transit or driving, blah, 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 but you're gonna see the best benefit if you combine micromobility, Uber, Lyft, with transit. You're going to see it's faster than transit alone, and it's cheaper than just taking Uber alone, which is great for the low-income community, a lot of different communities. Okay, go ahead. We're also doing micromobility analysis, so being able to bring all of these in. We're able to study scooter plus transit interactions, bike share plus transit interactions, and it's all, I might say, historical data. So we have been grabbing and storing all of this data for almost a year. We also have real-time data coming in, predicted information. Go ahead. and also machine learning. So once you get all this data in here, you can create new data. With machine learning, we're using that to actually improve our real-time information. Go ahead. And then also origin and destination. This is pretty, I mean, it was astounding. I never thought that we would get here. There's only few other agencies that are doing this, but go ahead. We have a fast pass program, and like a lot of other agencies, it's tap-on only, and everybody knows how important it is to get that destination, analysis. So go ahead. I might say that the data scientists, they were like kids in a candy shop. And like Julian, one morning he had figured it out and he brought in, the data, he had tested it so we could test it, double check it. And he pulled an all-nighter. I mean, I hadn't been that passionate about something, in quite a while. But so for our comprehensive service plan analysis, we had a deadline. We wanted to get all this data in there, but also QC'd and validated. So some of our planners, Grant McConnell, used this for our service planning analysis. And this is an example of the line 35. So it has an unusual geometry. And using the Hob ODX analysis right away, he said it would have taken quite a long time to figure this out just immediately. But looking at the transfer rates, they're now getting rid of the double back and redesigning the route. And then one more example I want to show you is, go ahead. The 71 and the 72. They're presently two separate routes. Go ahead. And looking at the O&D analysis and analyzing where the passengers were coming, where they were going, and most importantly, where they were transferring, now they're actually combining the routes. Go ahead. Okay, one more, last one. The impact, again, we're just being able to see the impact. Go ahead. And what I want to introduce to you is the idea of going beyond data and metrics and analysis and going beyond looking at, just ridership data, beyond looking at data beyond ridership and analysis, but also if you can think about it, bringing all this information into a visual tool. Right now, I'm not saying this is going to replace, a bus dispatch system, but when you're managing micromobility across all modes of mobility across an ecosystem, across a region, you need to do more than manage headways. So again, the smart mobility platform, I think, has a lot of potential, and we're really excited to work more on it and share with you in the future what we find. So thank you. Sorry.
Thanks so much, Bibiana. That's a really exciting platform, and we're excited to see where it goes. How much of that is accessible to the public right now versus sort of agency-facing?
It's interesting with the HOP data. It's very, even internally, there's only several of us who have it. There's privacy and confidentiality issues. But in the future, we'll be sharing the results with the public, but it really is, at least for now, an internal tool.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, next I want to introduce Omer Verbas from Argonne National Labs.
Hello, everyone. My name is Omer Verbas. I've been working at Argonne National Laboratory for about 6 years, and before that, I got my PhD at Northwestern University. So, like for over 15 years, I've been working on mostly on the network modeling aspects of transportation modeling. We are a group of 30 people, the Vehicle and Mobility System section, and under that, we're a group of 10 that does transportation and mobility. The vehicle side is more focused on the powertrain simulation and things like that, so that where we can then have detailed energy output. Next slide, please. Sure, but so Argonne National Laboratory is energy laboratory, so we are very interested in energy use, and as you know already, transportation is a major consumer of energy. But what we are trying to model is the system of systems approach. So although as like a group of experts, we are focused on transportation, we like to collaborate with other groups at Argonne, other laboratories, universities, industry partners, so that we can capture everything around transportation. For instance, let me give an example. After COVID, many of us are telecommuting more. Does that necessarily improve traffic? Well, maybe there's less VMTs, but then there's more opportunities for discretionary activities. Now, what happens with that to energy use with the VMT change? That's one aspect, but also now we're spending more time at homes compared to, let's say, a commercial building, and the commercial building's energy consumption and energy efficiency is different than like a, let's say, single unit house. So you need to capture buildings, or let's say we're pushing for vehicle electrification, which is amazing, but it will hit a point where the existing grid, electricity supply will not be enough. So you need to look at grid investment. And there are groups at Argonne that models that, and like we are integrating our tools with them, and then depending on what type of energy, electricity generation you do, it might counter like a little bit, maybe the electricity production itself may not be that green. So we need to capture all of these. So we have a very much of an aggressive system of systems approach. But when it comes to the transportation modeling, our software is called Polaris. It's an agent-based tool where we model both the demand and supply aspects of transportation. We synthesize a population in a, let's say in the Chicago context, like we synthesize 10 million people living in around 3 million households, owning 6 million vehicles, and then and they are like socioeconomic features, like what type of income do they have, what's their education level, where do they live, where do they work, what is their daily travel activities, and like from there, we go all the way down to point-to-point routing, simulating every single vehicle in traffic, and then what is their trajectory, how did they accelerate and decelerate, and so on and so forth. And then we feed that into our autonomy model, which is estimates the overall energy use. Next slide, please. And when we model that, let's say from the transit perspective or multimodal simulation perspective, Polaris generates for every single agent in the simulation the activities, and then where are they doing those activities, what time are they departing, and then what mode of transportation they're using to get there. And then that goes into a fully intermodal routing algorithm for cars, TNZ vehicles. We also simulate the freight operations. So freight vehicles are also like running it around. We do point-to-point transit routing, as well as all the active modes, you know, bicycles, scooters, and things like that. And any intermodal combination that you can think of, let's say, I'm gonna take a TNC to the train stop, and then, you know, take the train and then walk the last mile. We can route that in Polaris. So it was good to hear, Bibiana, that you are doing that as well. And then we simulate the traffic, the movement of the vehicle and people. And although I described it in a like sequential fashion, they continuously feed back from each other. So like, let's say maybe you missed a transfer, it means that then you're rerouting, and then you might end up maybe replanning your mode. you might end up postponing your activity or canceling your activity, and things like that are captured. Next, I'm going to go into some case studies around, mostly around transit, to give an example, but given the time, I'm not going to get really into details and just like to show some of our capabilities and interests. The first one we did maybe around like 4 or 5 years ago. That was asked like specifically by Department of Energy, because they said, oh, even like in the Chicago region, transit mode share seems low, like it's like 8%, it's in the single digits, like why is this important? And then we said, okay, let's create a case study where we removed all the transit service from the Chicago metropolitan region. No CTA, no Metro, no PACE. Let's see what happens. Well, speed reduction up to 50%, major gridlocks in the loop in the downtown area. Our simulation captured that immediately, and then that kind of changed the perception for many people, luckily. And then after that, when COVID hit, next slide, please. When COVID hit, we did a similar study around with Chicago Transit Authority, where we looked at if they go through a service reduction, 55% or 20% frequency reduction, and also in parallel, even after like COVID recovers, people's perception around transit has changed, and what if people don't come back even if the service is the same? And then in the last scenario, what if these are combined? And again, like similar findings, huge reduction in ridership, but also huge increase in speed, and also huge reduction in discretionary activities, because some people can't move around anymore. And the economic impact that we analyzed could go up to like $7 billion annually, which was an order of magnitude larger than like what the budget cut would have meant. So our general finding here, and I believe this audience is actually very aware of that, is even if you never use transit yourself, if you live in an urban setting, you still want to have a good transit system, a functional transit system, because it's the backbone of transportation. And if you take that out, or if you reduce its service, it's going to affect everyone, not only the transit users. And also what we found is, of course, it's not affecting everyone equally. Some people, like lower income people, were affected worse by it. Although this slide is not showing it, but next one, please. We also looked at some frequency optimization scenarios and adding BRT line scenarios. And in these studies, what we found was for, let's say, Chicago Transit Authority, frequency increase does not necessarily do much improvement because it's already a high frequency service. But in the suburban context for commuter rail and suburban bus, investing in improving the frequencies, reducing headways can be beneficial. But on the other hand, adding BRT lines for Chicago Transit Authority would yield more return in terms of increased ridership. And finally, we looked at modeling first mile, last mile service. This is TNC vehicles serving as feeders, and when it's subsidized, we found that the transit mode share of transit can increase by up to 20%. And last but not least, we're still working on different aspects on the transit side. Now we're focusing on more fleet operations, like which bus is running, which service at what time. We do that because we want to be able to look into vehicle electrification, bus electrification, and then those vehicles will have much higher downtime, to charge and everything. So we want to look at what lines, what routes are more feasible to electrify, and so on. we're already modeling micromobility operations in terms of like people picking up a scooter or like a docked bicycle, go somewhere and like dock it back. But at the moment, we're not modeling the fleet side of things where they do load balancing. We're working on that. And finally, on the TNC side, we already have a detailed TNC operations module, but we're looking more at the driver behavior, how people decide whether they want to ride pool or take an individual trip, and so on. And with that, I'd like to finish. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Omer. And when all of the names of the organizations up there, when CTA and RTA and so forth, are those, so is this model already informing policy and infrastructure decisions at those places, or?
Yes, like with Chicago Transit Authority, we presented like all the details of our I mean, the one slide I showed, like we actually ran like multiple scenarios for them, and like we were directly communicating with them on a weekly basis. We presented it to their president, and that was basically like 2 years ago. Whereas with RTA, we collaborate with them on the first mile, last mile, and then decide, like where would it make sense, like what corridors would be the first targets and things like that. And universities that we listed usually, they have an access to the Polaris source code, and then when they want to try out their own algorithms, their own approaches, so they basically contribute to the research that we're doing. And then with City Tech, we're gonna do some deployment study. Yes.
And I lost it. So looking at the TNC, modeling the choices with the TNCs, you're thinking about both users and drivers, like how drivers would optimize their own routing and so forth in the city to
Absolutely.
by time of day and so
My
forth?
coworker Murthy has been the main lead, took the lead in that. So please correct me if I say anything wrong. But we started with more having a system optimal approach where it's almost as if it was autonomous or synonymous to being autonomous in the sense that it's for what's good for the fleet, what's good for the service provider. But now we are adding the driver behavior, and drivers do not necessarily act in a system optimal fashion, right? They are more user optimal, and then they might not necessarily do the best thing. So how they cruise, how they decide to accept the trip.
They're not thinking about the big congestion picture. They're thinking about where the business will be. Right.
Absolutely.
And is this so far is the model only for Chicagoland?
No, Chicago is kind of maybe the most worked on one because we're in Chicago, but we have models for Austin, Texas, Atlanta, Knoxville, Chattanooga, those 3 areas, and together, and then Detroit. But we're thinking of expanding into LA, Seattle, and New York City.
And
but
Miami.
we're open to any. Go ahead.
Miami.
Please.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm here.
we need data, but otherwise, absolutely, we'd be excited to because the more you model, the more we learn, and the more we can be helpful.
Excellent.
Nice way to segue the spotlight back to yourself, Carlos.
Excellent.
So
yes.
You are next.
Yes. So I'm on my 3rd coffee today. I woke up at 3 in the morning, so you guys have to, keep up with me. So my name is Carlos Cruz-Casas. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for the Department of Transportation and Public Works for Miami-Dade County. That is a long name, right? And doesn't do justice what we do. I like to consider ourselves a mobility management agency. Next one. Yeah. There you go. Why? Because we have full control over traffic control devices, traffic signals and signs, bicycle and pedestrians, traffic engineering, highway engineering, transit planning, transit operations, and even regulatory arm for for-hire vehicles, taxis and limos, and before the state preempted us, Ubers and Lyft, right? So it's basically everything that moves in Miami-Dade County. And when we talk about mobility, the next one, I always like to kind of ground ourselves. For transportation enthusiasts like me and probably everyone in this room, mobility is a bus, a rail, and perhaps a bike lane, right? Perhaps a scooter these days. But if you ask your friends, if your neighbors, mobility, yes, bus and rail, but mostly about going to the groceries, going to the concert, going to the dinner with friends, or just to the doctor. So grounding ourselves in what mobility is and a little bit on what the conversation this morning was about, which is it is not about just numbers, right? Because if it was about just numbers, we'll make a bunch of short routes that people have to do a lot of transfer, then our ridership will be insane, right? So I wanted to start on that. And the next one, and I think the theme here is, and I think this might be a song, Colin, this is for you singing later, is ridership data, what is it good for, right? Well, absolutely something. I would say it's something, it's good for something, right? In this case, we're able to look at our system. We have 99 bus routes. We have more problems than that. But the top 15 routes actually carry more than 50% of our ridership, right? It's something that we know because we're looking at ridership data. And we know that the lowest 50% of our routes carry only 10% of our ridership. It is important for us to have this information at hand. The next one. And then we looked at not only the routes in terms of how long they are and what people are getting on and off, but the actual utilization of that route, right? And we start looking with real-time transit information, real-time passenger boardings. We look at ons and off, and we know that those are the heavy areas where we have ridership, and this is the middle of COVID. And the reason that I'm saying that is because we needed to start, when COVID was a stress and a shock and a bunch of these things that basically put ourselves at risk, and it's challenged the way we think about transit. And now for us is how do we use data that we know to actually make better decisions? And the first thing that we did, and you've probably seen this graph in many other places, COVID hit, the horizontal bar is ridership in 2019, so give you an idea where we are. And this is only graph of the top 10, 15 bus routes that we have. When COVID hit, our ridership went down on average to 40% of what it was before, right? Next one. And we start seeing that over the next year, those 15 routes actually start increasing the ridership. And the reason was that we took information from real-time passenger information and the loads, and start adding buses. Every single arrow that you see here on May 2020, we were at 100% of our service. In July, in August, September, November, January, February, and March, all those months we're adding buses to those routes. We basically took the tour bus that will take you to the casinos or the Everglades. We wrapped them with our colors. We're giving a tablet and basically turn them into a transit vehicle. So basically, we start increasing service in all those routes. And then the dip that you see on the far right, in June 21, it is when we remove all those supplemental service, and we're talking about 120 buses that we added to our fleet by just doing this, and we added the fare collection back. So it just gives you a perspective of what we're able to do with data, on transit data, the way we do it today. And what we learned is what we knew before. Frequency matters, and the consistency of service throughout the entire day is more important, right? And that we can actually effectively reallocate services without creating a disparate impact. We can actually move resources around, and the data is available in our fingertips to make those decisions today, right? And what I said is the elements of a good transit network works all the time. Even in the middle of COVID, we're able to put a basic of good transit network, and we actually saw more ridership than we had in 2019 pre-COVID. So it gives you an idea of where we're going. Next one. But when we talk about then, through this same time, we're looking. Increasing ridership is one thing, but how do we rearrange our entire bus network to be more effective? And we look at boardings, yes, but we also look at travel times because we understand that it's basically what put transit behind. In the top, if you have a person that takes basically two 30-minute routes and goes from one end of the Miami-Dade County to another one, we assume that the waiting time at the beginning and at the transfer point is half of the headway. We start looking, if you convert those 30-minute route into 15-minute routes, then the waiting time gets cut in half, and actually the travel time gets shrunk. And by doing that, what we can do is within the same amount of time, people can reach a lot more places. Next one. And that's how we measure our Better Bus Network. And my apologies if I didn't introduce that. Is our approach to really redesign the entire bus system in Miami-Dade County. We erase all the bus routes and we start creating a new system with information, with feedback from the community and data, right? And what we did is we capture not ridership, but we capture the amount of jobs that someone can actually get from their point or they are at the moment with the increase of this network. And this is by making the buses faster, by making it more frequent, and by making sure that people have more accessibility. And the reason we say jobs is not because everyone goes from job to job to jobs, but everywhere you go, there's someone working. Whether you go to Walgreens, whether you go to a coffee shop, everywhere you go is someone working. So we use that as a proxy for activity and trying to understand the wall of life, if you will, right? How far you can go with 45 minutes on transit. Next one. And it was to not our surprise the fact that when you build a transit network with those basic elements, not about ridership, it's about how far it can go with transit in the same amount that can go in a car. 98% of total Miami-Dade County residents will have a better service. And the way we do that is basically, like I mentioned, restructuring our system. I have here a map on the left is existing routes, and the right is the proposed, actually got approved last year. We're going to implementation next year. It's too little, don't focus anything, just the colors. Basically, green means every 60 minutes, blue means every 30 minutes, orange is every 20 minutes, and red every 15 minutes all day. We looked at consistent headway the entire day. We started seeing how the benefits start moving from the left to the right. And the next one, the biggest benefit that we saw, it is not necessarily during peak time, because everyone knows that we've been planning transit for peak, and not necessarily everyone uses transit on peak. During the middle of the day, we started seeing the greatest benefit. Many green lines became blue, many blue became red, and the pink, which is every 7.5 minutes, started to appear. So when you build a network like this, you will get the ridership, but you're not doing it because of ridership. You're doing it to increase accessibility to places, right? And that is the outcome. That's the outcome of what we do transit. I think was a question this morning is, why do we do transit? Just to get people on buses? No. It's to get people places in a comparable way, in a way that is aligned with our goals. Putting a lot of people in the same vehicle at the same time is the best use of space, right? Next one. And this is not something new. I always like to point back to the Brookings Institute, a research that I read about 2011. That's 11 years ago, man, that's a long time. And it basically looked at the top 100 metro areas in the nation, and Miami-Dade County ranked number 5, right? I was happy, it's at number 5 in transit coverage. That means the percentage of people that have a bus stop within walking distance is very high. But then when you look at transit service, which is measured by the amount of people that can go from their home to the typical non-farming job in transit in less than 90 minutes, it was 15%. No wonder we're 86 in the top 100 or 85. So when you look at that, yes, you put lines on a map and you say it works, but ultimately you're not getting the outcomes that you want. And I think that's when I start looking into this conversation. The next one. But like I mentioned, but mobility is not just bus and rail, right? There's a lot more things out there, and I'll probably argue it's time for us to start redefining what public transit means, right? And we'll get to that at one point, right? Whether it's bus and rail and connecting everything else that connect people to opportunities. And the next one, and one thing that I'd like to highlight is this map, and probably in the screen is gonna look a little better, is a blank map with only our bus routes on the left. You see the coverage that you have. Those pink lines, those are our bus routes. Nothing but our bus routes. In the right, you see 1 year worth of micromobility trips. So basically, it's a blank map with nothing, just the micromobility trips. So you see the contrast, right? You start seeing that there's areas that micromobility actually were taking people that transit couldn't. And Miami-Dade County is huge, right? It's bigger than some states. There's no reason why the typical transit vehicle needs to meander through neighborhoods to take people to where they are. So that's really interesting about your work on how fixed route service and micromobility can actually work together, because this to me is a winning combination of service and reliability to get people where they need to go. Next one. Another thing that we found out is it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. There's an opportunity for us to not only talk about the first, last, or the only mile, micromobility can be part of the solution. During COVID, we were leaving people behind. Even with those 120 buses, added to the fleet, we're leaving people behind at the bus stop. And that's inhumane to me, so that you have a service, but at the same time, we're limited to what we can provide. So what we did is, if you're willing and able to take a micromobility device, a scooter, a bike, or a moped, and you can do that for a short trip along those routes, 77, the 119 going to the beach, and basically the Flagler Little Havana area. If you're willing and able, then we'll reward you with the same amount of money that you spend on that. We use a rewards program to basically cover that cost. To me is, if you can be on the small form factor device and free up that seat for someone else that needs it more, that's a good use of our money, right? It's a good use of balancing the movement on that corridor. So it was a small pilot that we did during COVID, and I think it's something we'd like to explore further. And the next one and last one, I believe, yes. And of course, I cannot finish a presentation without one of those funky acronyms. So I think about MIA, think about data. It's about measure, get insights, and get into action. So I'm thrilled to be here today. As you can tell, it's 3 coffees already, 3 in the morning, but I'm excited about the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos.
Yeah.
So that was a sort of interesting natural experiment that you guys had with, you were throwing new buses onto the road throughout the system, right? And that was made possible because you were zero fare at that time.
Correct.
So you could avoid all the having to deal with fare boxes and all these other vehicles. Mm-hmm. But then at the end of that, you removed both zero fare and all those buses at the same time.
Yeah.
Has there been a response from policymakers to when you showed them that data about what you learned there?
Yeah, a couple of things, right? The reason that we're able to introduce so much service, it was we declared a state of emergency, right? We get able to get into contracts. So I heard earlier today about let's demonstrate governance,
right,
that we can pilot and demonstrate better procurement processes. That's one thing that I want to put that aside. But yes, basically during that moment we were able to add all these vehicles in just a matter of weeks, right? When the state removed the state of emergency, basically our hands were tied. We were not able to continue with those contracts, so we had to shut them down.
Okay.
Did it help? Yes. Throughout the same time we were going through COVID, we were going through our bus network redesign process, and there was a lot of pushback of whether or not we can actually reallocate buses to different locations and get better outcomes. And we say, yes, look at this. If we put buses all day, I'm not talking about just 8 to 5 crowd, all day, buses every 10 minutes, every 5 minutes, Ridership goes up. We're carrying more people in those routes than before COVID. And again, in the middle, there was some, and again, this is actually, we even remove overnight service, so there's actually a limited time span, and still carrying more people, right? So I think it helped us to then get unanimous approval of the Better Bus Network in October of 2021.
So you're planning for more off-peak service, and then how are you, do you anticipate, does that mean you're reducing peak hour service? And then are you going to see like capacity crunches as a result of that and crowding, or?
So we'll take a look at it. Right now, our projection is that we're not going to be seeing that particular issue, right? Sometimes, when we look at run cutting, service scheduling, we see how inefficient some of our routes are, right? You basically do a pull out to get a bus out there to do 1 trip or 2 trips and just not carrying that many more people. So what we're saying is that we're not going to have capacity issues. However, another point to highlight is the 8 to 5 crowd might be a thing of the past, right? So again, we're planning. We need to plan future mobility with our current and future elements of understanding where people need to go and the new mobility solutions, not always basically looking backwards. So I think it's a combination of a couple of things that came together. And again, we haven't implemented it yet, but we feel very strong that by doing so, we actually increase accessibility. People see the benefit of transit, and ultimately, as a byproduct, we'll see higher ridership.
That's great. Well, thanks all 3 of you for those presentations and the really interesting work that you're all doing. I want to go back to something that we heard this morning, something Karina said, which was, how do we think about capturing the good that transit does? Carlos, you gave the example of, the increased accessibility within 45 minutes. Was that job accessibility
Yeah.
or just location?
Jobs and residents.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how should transit agencies in particular look at or think about or value the changes in mobility, increased mobility by whatever mode that we can put together through both more shared mobility, through more transit service, or Omer, how does something like that, how does sort of that social good figure into the kind of modeling that you do? Who wants to
Bibiana, you want to
with
start? No?
One of my first thoughts. There we go. One of my first thoughts is before I think a lot of service is structured around feeders, feeding into your subway, buses feeding into your subways, buses feeding into your light rail, commuter rail, things like that. But again, just looking beyond that and looking at other things, supplementing that to feed into these main arteries and the main backbone, the main spine of your transit agency. So.
To me, again, we're in a different position, if you will, right? We're a transit agency that it gets embedded within the county agency, right? We're a department of the county. And 5 years ago, we actually merged public works and transit. So now our return on investment as one agency is no longer just ridership, it's not having to widen roads or build more parking or do some other elements, right? So to us, it's a more kind of all-encompassing approach to it. So of course, we see the benefits of not having to basically make wider roads, right? Basically, I think the conversation earlier this morning, we are actually taking lanes away from cars and put them on protected bicycle lanes, right? So we see the benefit ultimately because it aligns with a monetary benefit towards the end of the line, but at the same time, it aligns with the goals of our mayor, right? To basically support all that types of modes of transportation equilibrium. So that's just one aspect of it. The other thing is, ultimately, I think there's a distinction that we mentioned this morning between a city or a transit agency. And to me, those lines start basically blurring out. And we start seeing that all of us are going to become mobility management agencies, right? Where it's our responsibility to manage the demand on the public right-of-way in time, space, and mode. We've been doing that for years with green light, red light, no parking zone here, speed limit here and there. But now we have modes, right? So we have another tool in our tool belt that we can use. So by doing so, we can maximize the throughput in our corridors with the same resources. So that to me is a benefit. And at the same time, you start seeing that we're just about movement. We're trying to move people in cars, people in buses, people in bicycles, and even goods in all those trucks that's basically giving you something within 2 hours, right? So I think it's really a full benefit of maximizing the use of the different modes out there.
So there's unified governance between city and county, but then also all of your transportation functions are under, like transit, streets, freight is all under one department, so you can really think about.
Miami is a little unique. So we're not unified city and county. We have 34 municipalities within Miami-Dade County. However, by state law, we have a charter rule that we have full jurisdiction over mobility. So the cities, when they want to do something in their street, they need to ask permission from us, right? So again, it's something that we've been using as a leverage. We work very well with the municipalities that we have. Miami, Miami Beach, and some of the others are doing great things. But in terms of mobility, ultimately, Miami-Dade County, the Department of Transportation is sole responsible. We enter into interlocal agreements with the cities. They provide their own local circulators. We have 900 buses, rail, automated people mover. We have a microtransit. We have micromobility solutions. But the cities also have their trolleys, which I think was mentioned this morning by Justin, right? This thing, people get infatuated with those cars, and it's just slow, and they're wooden seats. I don't get it. I just don't get it. But ultimately, it's move people around, right? So I think it is a position that we have full control over mobility, and we can work with the partners in order to achieve greater.
So Omer, we went a little afield there, but just bringing it back to the kind of quantifying or valuing the social social value of mobility? How do you approach that?
Well, I mean, when we run a study, when we run a simulation, we produce like a lot of data that it's almost like overwhelming. That's why we actually like want to work more like with cities and like transit agencies and so on to basically to look at what and like how to slice it. Because like for instance, when we run a simulation, we produce like every single trips like link by link movement. Like that means that by let's say we came up with a design of like micromobility integrated with transit, and then let's say we came up with a perfectly ideal like amazing setup. We set it up, and like when we then run the simulation, we can say who used it, like from where to where did they go, how long did it take them, like how long did they end up waiting, how long did they end up walking, how long did they spend time in the bus, and so on and so forth, so then we can get the aggregate metrics, or we can look at the individual experience, and then what is, let's say, the income of these people. Like we can slice it by quintiles, and then since in the simulation we also let's say assign those people like vehicles. Let's say what type of vehicles did we take off traffic? What is the energy use like reduction in that? And then where was it experienced? Where, like, let's say, did the greenhouse gas emissions reduce like spatially and temporally? Like we can quantify that, and then let's say what type of communities really benefited from that, and like what type of communities may be more like negatively impacted. We can look at all of these things, and I believe that is. I agree with you. Ridership is very important still, because you, in the end, like need the revenue and everything. But we can also look at, as you said, like for people who are outside of the transportation world, it's like going to the doctors, going to the restaurant, and so on and so forth. We can basically look at that, like what's their delay, what's their experience, what type of activities did they engage thanks to this new service.
Yeah. So that's an excellent point, right? So we don't look at sales tax or sales generation in some of these areas, right? I've seen some great research from New York, right, and from Genesis Campaign in the past, but it will be interesting to start looking at that as another outcome and benefit of this. You know, sometimes I've been driving around, I drive too, guys, everyone drives through, right? So, and sometimes I want to go to a coffee shop and there's no parking around and I'm forced to go somewhere else. I've never seen someone on a bus and say, I'm not going to get off on the bus stop because it's too crowded, right? No, you actually have access to these places if you use this alternate mode of transportation.
Bibiana, you said that the planners in your elsewhere in Portland really were like salivating at the data that you guys started producing once they saw it, and that there was some things that they were like, oh, we wish you would have changed this. Can you tell me about some of the applications that they're finding for those, and what they maybe would have done differently?
Well, this was actually done pretty quickly. We moved up the priority to provide data for our comprehensive service plan. And as you can see, once they got the origin and destination study, a lot of things had changed. And before, historically, you would have to do surveys, onboard surveys, and especially during COVID, all of that stopped. So this is really the one downside, though. Using this data, you don't have demographic, data behind it. So, yeah.
You don't know who the people are. You just know
right.
Where they're going.
Right. You need to get that from survey information. Of course, you can get demographic information from the people when they sign up, but that's very hard to do, especially for transit agencies and PCI rules and things like that. So,
do you make any estimates based on like census tracts or where origins are or anything?
Oh yeah, all of the data is in there. Census, about pretty much any data set you can think of is in there. And again, we're just being able to see it. Like I said, I wish we would have did this at the very beginning instead of spending a year trying to figure out, trying to figure out, what we can do. And just another, thought that I had in this discussion is with regards to ridership, and when you're looking at mobility and getting people across town from point A to point B using multiple modes, what does that do to ridership? And for a lot of agencies, that's one of their sources of revenue. So what impact is that going to have on ridership? And yes, the advantage is you're getting people from door to door, point A to point B faster, less traffic on the roads, things like that. But how does that impact ridership? And that's one of the metrics that we want to study in this platform as well.
Yeah. It sounds to me like the same argument the cities have. I make money out of on-street parking, but I want to put a bike lane, right? So you really have to figure out the outcomes and what you want to bring for the community. So yeah, I think that diversifying that income, if you will, is probably the only way in order to make sure that we have multiple solutions.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have been thinking about the people on those bottom 50 routes that you showed, which I would guess those are probably like 45-minute, hour headways in those areas as well. So how do you, for all of you, how do you approach the kind of chicken and egg problem of latent demand and understanding where it's that there's not actually any demand, or just that the service is not there for people to rely on, so they're making other choices? How do you approach those questions in your work?
So to me, that's a result of a very kind of single-minded transit approach, right? The only thing I know how to run is a fixed route service, and I put fixed route service everywhere. And if I don't have the demand, I would just do a route every 60 minutes and just call it a day. It looks great on the map. That doesn't work, right? So what we're doing right now, and I think this is a pivot moment for us and for the industry, right? Is before we couldn't talk about transit desert. That was a no-go. There's a non-starter of the conversation. Today, I feel comfortable. I don't know about you, but I feel comfortable about talking about a transit desert as long as it's not a mobility desert, right? Because now we have micro-transit solutions in some of these areas, and now we have micromobility solutions in some of these areas. We partner with carpoolers and basically created actually a red carpet at the parking right location to actually promote carpools. We have band pools, we have other solutions out there, right? So to me let's go back, and the gentleman this morning about the conversation about adding car share, right? Asking them what is actually holding you back, what is not, what you cannot do with transit today is where you need to start, and then look at this number of mobility solutions that are available today. And it might not be a bus, and we need to be okay with it. We need to be okay by not providing a fixed route service in everywhere in our communities, right? And I think this is what's happening now, and hopefully we take advantage of that and start thinking we can do more than just these double routes.
And to go on after that, it's almost like with regards to technology, I talk about in order to support all of this, what does it look like under the hood at a transit agency? What does technology look like? What does operations look like? Things like that. And we don't know, but the technology, again, like open architecture, you have to stay flexible. And it's the same thing with planning. It's the same thing with, again, looking at what is the future of transportation and fixed route service? And the only thing we can do, I think, at this point is, beyond speculation, is to remain agile and with policies to have them more flexible, et cetera, et cetera. So.
That also reminded me, though, of something else that in the funding discussion, how much is tied to the half-mile or 3-mile radius to a bus stop. And then if you're eliminating the fixed route service, that also is, you're sort of taking money off the table possibly for other improvements that can happen. So yeah, that's another complexity there.
And yes, in my new role, I used to do all the service planning and scheduling. I used to do all the bicycle pedestrian elements, and now I'm focusing more on innovation mobility services. Under that new approach, I'm taking over paratransit. And we don't talk about that enough, but we should talk a little bit more about that. And there's a lot of basically guidance on basically you do your paratransit within an area that you serve and fix up services. So if that's going to change, how we're going to be looking at the paratransit service, right? So it's something that I'm going to be kind of looking in more detail over the next year is how we modernize the paratransit service and start walking away from the old approach of doing so.
And that it's not necessarily tied to the shadow of fixed
Yeah,
route anymore.
for in our side, we've forever been using countywide. You know, we don't use a shadow of the fixed route service, but I know other places do. So I wonder, you know, in general, I look at the industry as a whole, how basically this type of decision-making process will impact other underlying services.
Omer, do you want to
Yeah,
talk about that?
in terms of, you know, like when you said like, oh, like, is it like the chicken and an egg thing? I believe like to some level, I believe like we can capture that because it's simulation, right? Like
Right.
we can make up unrealistically like high frequencies and then like, and we kind of did, you know, like, and then look at how much it increases ridership and it is like significant, but it is not like the numbers like necessarily one hopes for because again, like it can run every 5 minutes, but if it is not accessible, if it is not walkable, then who's gonna take it? And I totally agree that, you know, like we need to more like focus on like the point-to-point like mobility, like how do we provide access? And I think like one approach is like starting to maybe like reduce these like lower use fixed route services and start like replacing them with more like on-demand transit or like TNC like services or providing more like micromobility vehicles and look at that. But I believe maybe there's some sort of like by some transit agencies, of course, not all of them are like more like, there's kind of like this, I believe, like ultimate fear that they're going to be then like completely like cannibalized by these like, you know, like new companies. But I don't think it has to necessarily be that way. It can be productive if it is done right with the right incentives. And another thing we are going to look at is actually congestion pricing. And then the revenue you're making from congestion pricing can be funneled into transit investments.
So do your entity, do you call them agents? What do you call the individual things?
We call them agents. You know, yeah,
So do they have sort of simulated decision-making processes where they're like, the bus costs this much, I have this much time, and I need to be
Yes,
at this
that's my
distance.
value of time because, you know, like I have like a certain level of income, so I can afford paying extra, but also depending on the activity, you know, like am I going to the airport to catch a flight versus
You've got to be there at a certain time.
you've got to be there at a
Right.
certain time. Like all of these affect your decision making, and then like it might be that, you know, because of traffic you're running late or because you missed a connection. Now, like, am I going to wait for another 30 minutes or am I going to call an Uber now because otherwise I'm running late? We capture these type of like on-the-fly decision changes.
Well, we have about 10 minutes left. I want to make sure we have some time for folks from the audience to ask questions. If you have questions for folks up here, anybody out there?
Thank you. I'm curious what best practices you've found sharing the data and sharing the analysis that you've done with non-technical stakeholders, both internal and external, you know, a city council person or a bus rider. Yeah, how do you share out these insights to a less technical audience?
So there's one thing I consider sometimes we're great planners, great engineers, and it's not easy for us to communicate these things, right? So the Better Bus Network, which is again, it was heavy on community engagement. The way it was done, and this is to me one of the most innovative things we've done, we partnered with a transit advocacy group. They took the leadership in terms of community engagement and leading the project. Right, it's the same group that was throwing stones at us. Now it's the same group working with us, with the community to convey this messaging. We talked about that. And then something that I'm trying, which is separate from this, but is hard for me to convey, If it's hard to me to convey ridership data, imagine me to talk about new mobility or new technologies and solutions and things like that to the community. So what we did is we're trying this out now with the Knight Foundation grant. It's called the Community Liaison Program. And what we do is actually we partner with a nonprofit organization and where we hire people from the community to talk to their members of the community. So it's someone, the same one that goes to church with you, that you meet up in the grocery stores and things like that, is the one telling you about numbers, the one telling you about, look at an AV shuttle, look at the on-demand transit, look at the sidewalk delivery bots. That to us is a better approach because it's basically community-driven and a community anchored, if you will. Because again, to me is everyone experiences a community different, right? And for me to come down and tell you about something when I'm not experienced the same way, it is not appropriate. So I can give you more information about that, but again, this is new approaches for us to do that with the community. In terms of the elected officials, it was more about outcomes. They can care less sometimes about where the bus is full or not, but I'm saying people are actually going to have 100% more jobs accessible within a 45-minute, right? That means more people will actually be able to live within your district and have more jobs accessible with the district. You no longer have to have commute of 2 hours to go different places, right? So we basically switched the conversation on outcomes and what that means localized in the one area. And that map that you show with the transit shed, we did that for dozens of places in Miami-Dade County, in which went through each one of the council members and we said, hey, look at this community. Now they have this much more access. That's how we kind of tried.
I might just add that that's one of the things that we're focusing on in the Smart Mobility platform and in the Urban Logic platform. A big part of it is metrics, the dashboard, visualizing the data, and we do a lot of that. We visualize the data, same data set in a lot of different ways, and we get feedback from all different, from the community internally and externally, and we're revising that, automating everything too. Yeah.
What about Polaris? Is there a useful or accessible to the layman interface with it, or?
Not layman, like it's still like a research tool, so it has to be like a more like educated user. But we provide that support. Like if there's a need to use it, we help them like set the software up. We show them how to use it, and
So is it all open source?
it's like in a way like not like open down, like you can go ahead and download now, but like we have to grant you the access, but after that it's free.
Okay.
So it's just like some like copyright protection because it's like an intellectual property, but you can use it for free.
Any more questions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the question was, we have 99 bus routes that Miami-Dade County runs, but we have over 60 routes of free circulators, right? Some of them are fixed route, some of them are on demand with golf carts, right? So in terms of ridership, the collection is something that we're working on with them right now to start with the city of Miami, Miami-Beach, to put automatic passenger counters, right? Just to get started. Those are local circulators, don't have that information. We tried through the Better Bus Network to integrate them into the overall planning. There was a lot of political fight in the conversation, so we decided to build a better network and start getting them on board. What we're doing right now, and again, this is catching up to the times, because they're headway based, right? Mm-hmm. Basically, none of them have GTFS, right? It's headway based. They run one bus here, two buses there. City of Miami is more advanced. They have 50 buses that they run. So that's the first thing that we're addressing right now. We're able to include Coral Gables in our GTFS and our GTFS RT in order to basically populate that to the public. And through that, now I am getting, because I'm providing them the access to the Swiftly platform, I'm getting actually the information from those routes. And then the ridership was something that we're going to be working on it to collect those. Right now is a monthly kind of tick marks kind of information. It's very archaic, but at the moment is trying to understand how those services can be supplemental to our current service. And we did a lot of that effort through the Better Bus Network. And what we're doing right now is doing a roadshow to basically work with all those municipalities to start figuring out how their service can be redesigned to match ours. The other thing is happening is now much more of them are doing on-demand transportation services, where you have Teslas driving around on demand, the golf carts driving around. So it's another opportunity for us to kind of collaborate. So we're starting to address that. We have a roadmap. We haven't been able to achieve all that, but this definitely is on our radar.
What about like the more traditional informal services that are around, the dollar buses and things?
Yeah, those are grandfather in. It's very difficult for us to work with them. We regulate those. I recall the jeepneys in Miami. It's about 15 companies that provide those type of services, and they kind of circle around. We basically trying to incentivize them to share some information with us. Some of the things we're trying to do moving forward, we do this with Hialeah today, which is another city, is trying to integrate them into our fare collection system. So hopefully we can help them modernize their fare collection system and basically trying to get them to provide better accessibility. The other one that we don't talk about enough, and we should talk more, is taxis. Those cars that are empty all day, man. I think we need to maximize the utilization out there. The same with TNCs, we can work together towards including that into the mobility ecosystem. So again, it is all these moving parts that need to be included. And I think what we're doing first is fixing the foundation with buses, right? That having a strong bus network is the most important thing. And then talk about all the other mobility solutions available to fill those gaps.
I guess sort of final thought here. Bibiana, I was thinking about that map that showed that you had a whole density of trips starting in an area that had no buses at all. So that they were connecting to a route, I think, but there was like a blue. Did I interpret that wrong?
Yes, I don't know what.
Okay. I'm just wondering about what do we know about other modes as connectors and what other modes are doing to fill in the gaps. What are you learning from the work you're doing in Portland?
We're just getting started, but I think a really good example is we streamlined our light rail stations downtown. And there's a lot of studies across the U.S. I personally think these studies are more geographic and cultural focused, but that there's not a lot of connection between scooters and transit. And so what we want to study, again, bringing all the data in there, is you would think with the data and with the historical data, you would think that streamlining the light rail stops, you would think that it would increase the scooter use between them. And if so, how can we facilitate that? So I think that's kind of a good example.
So if I may, I think the data that we don't know, we don't collect, and we need to work on is the personally owned micromobility device. Bike share increased the sales of bikes. We're now seeing a lot of personal scooters, and I'm expecting a lot more e-bikes. So all that information we don't get, right? And we want to complete the sidewalk network that Karina mentioned this morning. We want to complete the bicycle network. That data is really important for us to capture, right? Because again, we're building the right infrastructure to provide access to transit, but at the same time allow people to move, safely. So that's something that we don't have today, and it's challenging as it is, but we need to pursue.
Or last thought on other modes filling in the gaps and connecting to transit, and what you may be learning in your modeling?
We very recently started modeling micromobility movements, and we for instance, what we lack is usually on the demand side. We are we have the capability, let's say, modeling like all these detailed operations like at a pretty like good accuracy, but like what we usually lack is who's going to be the customer of these? Like what are like the factors, what are the important factors that will make people choose these things, because historically these things didn't exist.
Right.
So it's like very difficult to get an idea of
Who rides them?
who rides them,
when,
like,
why?
like at what price point, at what kind of spatial like coverage, and like how many, like let's say if I put 100 scooters, let's say near Merchandise Mart versus 200, like when it's like, let's say frequency, we have an idea of like what we will gain, what we will lose, but like what does that mean in terms of how many people will take it? Like the honest answer is we don't know. We're trying to like learn that now, like with like surveys and like studies, like like collaborating with University of Illinois at Chicago. But any data, any type of information would be like helpful for us to model it.
Okay, well, thanks everybody. Carlos, Bibiana, Omer, thank you so much for your insights today. And we will be taking about a half-hour break, and then moving to for the MIC grantees, we'll be moving into those meetings at 3:30. And then, is Nate here to wave to people? Okay, well, we'll find you guys and let you know where your meetings are. And then for everybody else, I think, does happy hour start now? Okay. All right.